Good day and welcome to this session on non-competitive procurement procedures. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain non-competitive procurement procedures, then briefly explain the forms of non-competitive procurement procedures, and then outline the reasons for using non-competitive procurement procedures. So as the name implies, non-competitive procurement procedures are the procurement procedures that do not facilitate competition. These procurement procedures do not involve opening up invitation to tender documents or opening up procurement proceedings to qualified and competent suppliers, and usually restrict competition to a few suppliers, or it has no competition at all, depending on the situation. And non-competitive procurement usually involves a government agency awarding contracts to companies without opening up the tendering process to open competitive bidding procedures, as was seen in the competitive procurement procedures. And it should be noted that these type of procurement procedures are used because of the urgency with which the entity wishes to satisfy their needs, as well as for security reasons. So in situations of emergency, in situations of catastrophic events, or in situations of national security interest, we use non-competitive procurement procedures because the requirement does not warrant the need to undertake rigorous procurement proceedings or following competitive procurement proceedings. So some of the forms of non-competitive procurement proceedings include sole sourcing, which involves writing tenders or engaging a single supplier who is the only available supplier in the market to provide goods, works, or services for the organization. Then single sourcing, which involves selecting one supplier out of the lot of suppliers to provide the goods, works, or services required by the procurement entity. Then restricted tendering, which involves the procurement entity selecting a few qualified and competent suppliers who they believe are capable of performing the procurement activity within the given terms and conditions. And finally, negotiated procurement, which is more about how the procurement entity is able to come into agreement with a given supplier on the terms for supplying the goods, works, or services required by the entity. So they are used in certain situations, some of which include where there is only one supplier available for a product or service and no reasonable alternative or substitute exists. Secondly, when there is an urgent need for the goods, works, or services, non-competitive procurement procedures are ideal. And also, when the items are of security concern, thereby making it impossible or inappropriate to use competitive procurement procedures, it is advisable to use non-competitive procurement procedures. Then when there is a catastrophe and the goods are very urgent, there is a need to use non-competitive procurement procedures. Also, if the procurement entity wishes to enter into a contract with suppliers for research, experiment, study, or development, the advisable method to use is non-competitive procurement procedures, because in essence it allows you to negotiate and come into agreement as to how you are going to execute these types of activities. Also, when you want to use single sourcing or a single source of supply to promote a given policy, but buying from any other supplier may not promote such a policy, it will be advisable to use non-competitive procurement procedures. When a procurement procedure has failed to produce a successful tenderer, either because no tender has showed interest or none was qualified, non-competitive procurement procedures are ideal. So the non-competitive procurement procedures have certain advantages, which include it being faster as compared to competitive procurement procedures because you don't engage in rigorous steps to identify sources of supply. It helps you to choose the most suitable suppliers because in the end you have been able to justify the supplier suitability probably based on experience or based on observation. Then there is also usually lower cost of tendering because you don't engage in pre-qualification or screening of a lot of supply tenders or tenders from suppliers. The procurement entity may negotiate for better delivery and services with the chosen supplier, and this also helps to reduce lead time for the procurement entity. The downside of non-competitive procurement is that it lacks the required level of competition, and if there is no competition, it means that the access to quality is also reduced. Suppliers may take advantage of the process to sell to the entity at higher prices. It is associated with a lot of risks because it is likely that the supplier that is being selected will grow complacent and will not perform the contract as expected. Then the options for satisfying a need is usually limited compared to competitive procedures. So in this session, you have learned about non-competitive procurement procedures, the forms of non-competitive procurement, and the reasons for using this procedure. Thank you.